Hello, this video is part 2 in my 3-part series on liberation theology and critical pedagogy. In this video, we're going to dive deeper into the work of two key figures, Gustavo Gutierrez, the father of liberation theology, and Paulo Freire, the father of critical pedagogy. In my previous video, I introduced Gustavo Gutierrez, a Dominican priest from Peru and the founder of liberation theology. He begins from the perspective of those living in poverty and oppression, insisting that theology must respond to real human experiences rather than remain abstract. Gutierrez's thought did not emerge in isolation. It grew in dialogue with broader developments in the Church, especially the renewal called for by Vatican II, and the insights of theologians like Karl Rahner, who emphasize that God's grace meets human freedom in the lived experience of each person. Drawing on these influences, Gutierrez developed a theology where reflection and action are inseparable. For Gutierrez, knowing God means encountering Him in the world, encountering the poor, and engaging in the struggle for justice. Alongside Gutierrez, Paulo Freire shaped thinking about oppression and liberation in the realm of education. Often called the father of critical pedagogy, he emphasized that education is never neutral. It either reinforces power structures or challenges them. Those who experience oppression have a unique insight into the conditions that keep them marginalized, and learning becomes transformative when students and teachers engage in dialogue that connects reflection with action. Freire's focus on lived experience complements Gutierrez's emphasis on something called praxis, and shows how liberation unfolds both in the classroom and in the world. Vatican II shifted the Church's approach to modern life. In documents like Gaudium et Spes, the Church insisted that the joys and hopes, the griefs and anxieties of all people are also the concerns of Christ's followers, reframing theology as something that must engage real life. This perspective created space for Gutierrez's theology, which understands salvation not only as spiritual, but also as historical. God's grace works through efforts to transform unjust systems. Karl Rahner, a German Jesuit, contributed to Gutierrez's development as well. Gutierrez has noted Rahner as a key influence on his theology. Rahner argued that every human being is naturally oriented toward God, and that God's grace is present in our deepest desire for truth and freedom, a reality that he calls supernatural existential. By grounding theology in human experience, Rahner connects divine mystery to everyday life and freedom. Together, these influences make Gutierrez's core claim clear. To know God is to encounter God, especially in the poor, in the oppressed, and in the struggle for justice. For him, theology is not merely reflection, but praxis, faith lived in history through engagement with the world's injustices. For Gutierrez, any action that isn't rooted in reflection is just activism. However, the requirement of action is a response to reflection and moves Gutierrez away from scholastic notions of theology, grounding his theological vision in the lived human experience of people. Anything short of this and you risk alienation and the dehumanization of people, which becomes the root of material and spiritual oppression in the world. Freire identified the educational side of dehumanization with what he called the banking concept of education. Here, students are treated as passive repositories for knowledge, unable to shape their own learning or understand their social reality. In this model, students are empty vessels that the teacher fills. This concept rejects the notion that students come with any prior knowledge or experience. By denying their prior lived experience, it therefore denies their humanity. Gutierrez names the theological counterpart for this as structural sin. Sin is not just personal failure for Gutierrez, but it becomes embedded in unjust economic, political, and social systems. True liberation is therefore a confrontation with these systemic sins, a struggle to align society with God's vision of justice and human dignity. The solution for both thinkers starts with awareness. Freire calls this conscientização, or critical consciousness. The moment when the oppressed begin to perceive their reality critically and understand that oppression is neither inevitable nor permanent. Gutierrez places this critical awareness at the very start of Christian life. He frames liberation theology as the second act in a two-step process. The first act is the commitment to the poor, an active engagement for those who suffer. Reflection and theology arise from this lived engagement. Freire's conscientização is precisely the step that enables such reflection to be meaningful. Liberation, then, happens on multiple levels at once. Socio-political liberation is challenging and transforming oppressive systems. Human liberation is cultivating critical awareness and dignity within individuals. And theological liberation is confronting sin and fostering communion with God. Freire and Gutierrez together provide a praxis in which faith and justice, education and liberation are inseparably linked. Their legacies challenge educators to cultivate agency, encourage critical questioning, and resist marginalization, all while grounding their work in Christ's vision of human dignity. In Part 3, we're going to explore what a faithful Catholic form of critical pedagogy looks like in practice, especially for teachers in public schools. How can we help students find their voice, question unjust systems, and live a liberated, meaningful life, all while remaining rooted in the gospel?